Welcome back to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at patrons in Traveler and how they can be very important to your Traveler campaign, or maybe just kind of a side thing. We're going to be looking at 76 patrons, supplement number 6 from the original Traveler campaign, my battered copy. I have a better copy, better condition copy, but this is the one I use in my campaign, and I thought, well, why not? So we're going to look at the patrons. Also today I want to remind you that I'm still on the big subscription drive. Very, very close. A little bit more work and I can get there. I want to thank everybody that subscribed already. If you know anybody who's on the fence, tell them come on over. Also, I've got a Patreon going on. One of my rewards for Patreon is going to be some of my notes on a planet for Traveler. It's already developed planet. It's already in Traveler. It's on the Traveler map. Just some of the notes I developed a little deeper into the planet. And that'll be out sometime in late May or early June. I'm also doing one for Dungeons & Dragons, but I'll talk about that in D&D videos. But back to the topic at hand today, patrons in Traveler on page 121. So patrons, the first thing I want to do is to describe what a patron is. A patron can be anybody that hires you to do something or asks you to do something, whatever your circumstances. If a guy says, hey, I'll give you 10 credits if you go get me a hot dog and a beer, he's a patron. It's a short-term contract. You go get it. You bring it back to him. He gives you the 10 credits. All's good. So that is an example of a patron. Arguably, Princess Leia in Star Wars, A New Hope, the original Star Wars, is a patron. Even though she's rescued and everything else, she is nobility. She does offer them a reward for getting the plans to the Death Star away to the rebels. So even though it's a rescue mission, in a way they're rescuing their patron. So that's where this book comes in. This fine battered copy of mine. It's seen a lot of hours on the table. And the idea behind the patrons, by the way, whenever I GM Traveler, whatever era I'm running, some of these little black books are sitting there at my spot on the table. I just like them. This guy was published in 1980. Mongoose did an update of this called 760 Patrons in, I think, around 2015 for first edition Mongoose. Unfortunately, that was during the period where I just felt, oh, I have 76 patrons. Why do I need 760? Okay, I'm done kicking myself. I'll get it eventually, but there have been other priorities higher than that. But what I'm saying is I've come to the realization that, yeah, the updated stuff really has its place. It doesn't replace the older stuff, but in a lot of ways it enhances it. This particular book was done by the great Lauren K. Wiseman, and original concept designed by Mark Miller, and then the assistants on this book was Tim Brown, Mark Miller, and John Harshman. So we're going to take a look at a little bit in this guy, but I want to talk more about patrons. Why are they important in your campaign? Well, they're not necessarily. It really depends on how you're running it, and if you're going to run a campaign based on a patron, if you're going to run a campaign that doesn't have a patron. A lot of Traveler campaigns, if it's a mercenary campaign, you're going to need a patron of some kind. I'll get into that in a minute. But if it's just you're aboard a free trader and you're going from point A to point B, and you're just dealing with materials that you are transporting and then selling for a profit and paying your maintenance on your ship, which is a great way to play Traveler, then you don't necessarily need a patron. You can go an entire campaign and never really encounter a patron. That being said, while you're on that planet, you've just offloaded your goods, there may be a patron there who has a side job for you, or it could be a patron that just hires your vessel for an extended term, and that can change the shape of the campaign. That really depends on the GM, and to a lesser extent the players, as to what kind of campaign they're looking to run. I have done campaigns where the patron has been the prime mover behind the entire story, and I've done others where there's been intermittent patrons that have come and gone in the players' lives. This guy's a broker. He knows your ship is going on to planet X, and he'll pay you X amount to take, in addition to the cargo you're trying to speculate on, he'll pay you X amount to maybe take him over to that planet, or to take a ton of cargo for him. That guy is now a patron. He is actually going to pay you to do it, And then, of course, how the cargo is. Is it legitimate cargo? Is it contraband? That's what you as the GM have to decide. My players are realizing that almost every time somebody else comes aboard the ship, they have a problem. They've gotten to the point where they've talked about only transporting people in low berth as corpuscles because they don't want to have to deal with the people trying to hijack the ship. That being said, I'm going to move away from that trope a little bit. That tells me I've been doing it a little too much. So I'm going to throw them a curve next time. And they watch these videos, so they'll know. But I'm going to throw them a curve next time and let them know that, oh, the next guy that you give transport to is just what he says he is. And that's where this book comes in. This book is very nicely laid out, especially considering it was published in 1980. This is pretty far thinking. You first off get the section, you have 2 to 6 players, and then it gives you, you've got a noble who is a playboy. The required skills for your party, none, and required equipment, none. And then it goes ahead and gives you the meat of what you're going to be doing. You're contacted by a newly married couple who decline to give their names, but have reason to believe that their respective parents are not pleased with their union. They will pay you $3,000 credits, to each member of a group, which will escort them safely to a planet beyond their parents' sphere of influence. So that's pretty straightforward, a Romeo and Juliet kind of scenario. But here's the interesting part. You throw a die 6, and it adds a wrinkle to it. If you threw a 1, the couple has overestimated their parents' reaction. No attempt is being made to have either one kidnapped or murdered. If you throw a 2, agents of one family will attempt to kidnap the woman. Agent number 3, if you threw it, as in 2, but the man is the kidnapped target. Number 4, agents of one family will attempt to have the woman killed. And then agent 5, as in 4, but the man is the target. And then if you throw a 6, both families will attempt to kill one of the couple and kidnap the other. So it's pretty neat because just the throw of the dice as you're prepping the game can completely change how you would handle this encounter. And that's what this book is all about. This is a referee's best friend. You're going to be able to just throw dice and come up with story arcs based on your dice throws. I have used this many times over the years. If I was stuck for an idea or the game suddenly changed, we were going to play AD&D, but for whatever reason, it's changed over. Now it's going to be Traveler. I only have a couple hours to get a game ready. I would go ahead and pull this book out. I still do. And take a look at a few of these and then throw some dice. I don't always let the dice dictate. I don't necessarily want some of these scenarios just because some of them get a little extreme. You could have the party really get demolished. But some of these are pretty neat, and they're all good to steal ideas from. Yeah, you're borrowing, you're not stealing. Okay, we're going to go to ship owner, noble, and your required skill for the group is a pilot and navigation, and then the required equipment is none. While on the planet Reese, the players are contacted by a wealthy-looking gentleman who seeks someone to pilot his yacht. And then it goes on again. It turns out, all is represented. The engine's been overhauled recently, but then it turns out that maybe somebody's trying to kill him or there's a stowaway on board. All depends on your dice throw and if you let that stand. So that's one of the beauties of this book. And as I said, considering this book came out in 1980, it's another example of how quickly Traveler moved along in being creative with their supplements. There were a lot of games that were in their infancy at this time who weren't nearly as sophisticated as this. So now we go to the next section. We have 5 to 12 players. And it's the same kind of thing, same breakdown. You're seeing also the number here. That will help you determine. You can throw it based on the 2 dice 6 throwing, where 1 die represents the 10s and 1 die represents the 1s. Or you can just go by section. I always use this book by the number of players I had, 5 to 12. This is a good section for that. I used to run Traveler games. Back in the 80s, I had Traveler games that would go as many as 8 or 9 people. So there were a lot of... That's a challenge. 8 or 9 people in a Traveler game can be a lot to GM. Much easier to do something a little more basic like a D&D game, or even a Champions game, for that matter, with that many people. Most ever GM'd in Champions was 15. That was a long night. And the most ever for AD&D was 24. So, but our average groups in the 80s were anywhere between 8 and 12. And then in the 90s, it pared down a little bit. For a while, it was me and Craig. Both my kids were little when my one son wasn't even born yet. My wife had taken a little hiatus while our oldest son was young. So it was me and Craig holding the fort, and we played some solo games. And then we'd recruit this guy or that guy, and now we're up to the group we have. So now the next section of this is 9 or more players. And again, you can adjust this however you want. All of these work for as many players as you have. You can just adjust the number of bad guys up or down. But this is very interesting. I want to get to one of the later sections in this book because I always thought it was neat. Single player. I did a few of these when it was just Craig and I for about a year, around 1996 or so. Our group boiled down to me and Craig. And in addition to running some solo D&D, I stuck him in a couple of single-player traveler adventures. I used to play the single player with another friend of mine in the early 80s. So some of these are a lot of fun. You know, merchant ship owner, your required skill is a pilot. Required equipment is none. It's just, these are cool. The next thing up, mercenaries. Yes, there are mercenary tickets in this book. That's pretty good, and especially considering Mongoose just came out with the mercenary book for 2nd edition. These are still on point, as most things from 1st edition, or from Original Traveler, I'm sorry, not 1st edition, but Original Traveler. Most of this translates flawlessly over to Mongoose. You might have to upgrade some of the verbiage here and there, but that's really about it. So you can have your mercenary tickets, ticket 1, ticket 2, you know, all the way through. There's ticket 5, all the way to ticket 8. There are 11 mercenary tickets in this book. And then an index, so you can look up if you wanted a diplomatic mission for so many players, that would be where you'd find it. So a nice little book. Still very usable. Again, I don't have the 760 patrons, so I'm not positive of the usability of that. If you have the book, you know, please let me know. Drop me a couple of lines and let me know if 760 patrons is something that's worth getting. Also, I haven't heard anything about another patron book being put out for Mongoose 2nd edition, but that's something they certainly could do down the line. So that's really it for today on patrons. They are what you want them to be. They can be as important or unimportant as you want them to be. My youngest son was watching a video game review, and I was walking through the room, and one of the things in the video game was you are in this battle mech, basically, and you're out of the battle mech for this part of the game. There's an electric fence that needs to have the power turned off, and the lady who controls the power grid says, yeah, I'll turn the power off if you go find my cat. And by the way, when you find my cat, the only way my cat will come to you is if you find its toy first. So here you are in the middle of this power struggle, possible firefight, whatever, and you've got to go find a kitty cat toy and then go find the kitty cat to bring him back to the lady to turn the fence off for you. One of the sillier things I've ever seen. I laughed at it. I said, oh, that's a silly side quest. He said, it's not a side quest. It's a main quest. I'm not looking to put something like that in my game. I can see where you might want to make that person a patron, where they'll do an activity for you in exchange for what you do. I certainly would not interrupt a combat potential sequence or some kind of subterfuge for something like that. I think I'd use a little more direct means to persuade the individual if they do want to turn the power off on the fence. But that's me. So that's really all I've got to say about the patrons today. Use them, don't use them, however you want. I think they have a place pretty much in every Traveler game. I've used them in virtually every campaign I've ever run. Patrons pop up at some point or another. But you can certainly run games or even whole campaigns without any patrons whatsoever. You can also have your player characters become patrons. Maybe they hire another group of NPCs to do some work for them. If that's the case, then they're the patrons. So there's a lot of ways to use patrons in Traveler. I recommend you play around with it a little bit. That's all I've got to say for patrons today on page 121. If you like what you heard and saw, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends, still trying to get the subscriptions. It's going real well, but I need a little more push to get over the top. And also, I have a Patreon going, so if you're interested in that, take a look at the Patreon page. I'll be posting that end of the month to early part of next month. So that's all I've got to say today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on page 121.